1080p content out there is starting to look pretty rough. So for a few years now, I've tried to make it a point to always aim for 4K 60fps coverage for your eyeballs' benefit. To make things even more buttery here though, I just upgraded from an RTX 3080 to the big old chonky RTX 4080. I feel like this could eat my old card. But was this upgrade really worth it? Well, I'm going to directly compare not only the performance jump between these two generations, kind of the normal thing to do, but also talk about the thing that truly matters most, the actual gameplay feel when playing these titles at maxed out settings in 4K. If you want to know my exact PC specs, I put those down in the video description. And hey, if you're new here, hit subscribe. First, looking at Cyberpunk in full 4K at the Ray Tracing Ultra setting. During nighttime with all that glistening coming off the roads, the old 3080 is doing decent, jumping around near 50 frames a second, which you can see in the frame counter in the top left of the screen. Switching over to the same location but on the RTX 4080, you can see not only the frame rate now hovering around a much more manageable 70 FPS, but also the DLSS setting, which dynamically changes the fidelity to assist with the frame rate, doesn't have to work quite as hard, resulting in a slightly more crisp look as well. During a combat encounter on the old 3080, the frame rate dips into the mid-40s, which isn't ideal for up-close and personal Twitch-based aiming. Normally, I would just turn a few settings down to get my frames into the 80+ range, but we're talking purely maxed out settings for this. The same encounter, but on the 4080, again, you see the frame rate hitting in the 70s, which makes aiming and movement snappier and more responsive. As you probably already know, frame rate isn't just a visual thing, it also affects gameplay feel. So higher frame rate equals more satisfying to control, which means video game more fun to play. For Cyberpunk in maxed out 4K settings, the 4080 beat out the 3080 by about 20 to 30 frames, which makes it play pretty solid for a single player RPG shooter, but for multiplayer games, you'll probably want to be hitting near 90 FPS and above. Speaking of, checking out now Warzone 2 in 4K resolution with almost everything cranked up to max. On the 3080, over in the airport section of the map, the FPS would jump around between 50 to 70. Perfectly playable for sure, however, those dramatic dips down into the 50s can be felt and can get you killed when milliseconds are on the line. On the 4080 in the airport area, this would go from around 90 FPS to 110, depending on what was going on. For me, this is my sweet spot where a shooter feels one-to-one between my mouse movements and what is being reflected in the gameplay. So for Warzone 2 and 4K maxed out, the 4080 saw a big boost of 30 more frames a second. Some of us survived an entire cinematic generation from the past that was just 30, period. Now heading into Red Dead Redemption 2 in 4K Ultra settings with many of the advanced options turned up. On the RTX 3080, heading into a gang hideout area, saw the FPS around the high 30s to mid 40s. Red Dead already has a pretty weighty and kinda sluggish feel to it, so this frame rate really made it pretty sloppy to control. Moving over to the 4080, you immediately see pretty much a doubled frame rate. Red Dead almost feels like an entirely different game when it's running that smooth. General navigation throughout the world on horseback with the 3080 was hitting around the high 30s. In that same region, with an even more taxing time of day illuminating everything, the 4080 was able to hit in the high 70s, low 80s. Now let's switch on over to Bright Memory Infinite at 4K max settings, but with DLSS turned off for right now. The RTX 3080 was definitely chugging in this watery area, with FPS around the mid-20s to low 30s. This is a highly fast-paced action game, and this felt very inconsistent and just not fun to move, dodge, and try to aim. With the 4080 in the same location, it was hitting the mid-40s to low 50s, which does control a little better, but we're not quite to where I want it to be just yet. That means it's time to tap into the frame gods' gracious wizardry they bestowed upon us. DLSS and the new frame gen option turned on. This ramps the frame rate up into the hundreds, which makes this section incredibly fluid and just clean. In a different area, with a lot of wind effects, reflections, water, and distortions, still the 4080 is crushing it between 110 and 120 FPS. I challenge you to spot any negative visual impact with those settings on. It's just magical free frames. As a gameplay matters most kind of guy, I love this tech. Now, car stuff. Let's check out Forza Horizon 5 maxed out in 4K. During open exploration, the 3080 was hitting in the high 60s, low 70s. For a racing game, this looks and plays perfectly well, which goes to show how well optimized this is. With the 4080, the frame rate rockets above 100, which doesn't impact how the game controls too much, but it does give it a faster sense of speed. You're watching a 60 FPS video on YouTube, so some of this stuff will not fully translate. During an off-road race, the 3080 was still hovering around the 60s to 70s most of the time. With the 4080, the other cars do make it dip compared to the open exploration, but it's still averaging around 20 frames higher than the 3080. And next, something I got addicted to this year, Grounded, at 4K max settings. On the RTX 3080, the frame rate would linger around the high 50s, low 60s, but would drop pretty sporadically at times when heading around to different areas. On the RTX 4080, it was hitting in the 70s to 80s during most of the general exploration and combat. Also, side note that makes some of these comparisons maybe even more impressive, every single clip you saw in this video was captured in 4K by the same PC that was running the game maxed out in 4K as well, not going through a capture card or anything. For console game capture in 4K 60, I use Elgato, but for PC, Nvidia's capture utility is one of my favorite things of all time, and I've used it for hundreds of my videos. So, in conclusion, let me know if you think the jump from the 3080 to the 4080 is actually worth it. And also, shoot me your specs down in the comments so I can see what you're rocking, or your dream specs that you want to have. As always, I'm Alex, and thanks for watching. I'll see you later.